All right, you guys be seated. Well, welcome out again. I don't know, this is kind of a weird Sunday for me because it is the end of a 3-month journey that we've been on, right? January, February, March. Okay, sorry. A 4-month journey that we've been on since the beginning of January through the Sermon on the Mount. And we have touched on all sorts of topics, some of them interesting, exciting, good news, some of them scary news, some of them, right, like countercultural. We've been all over the map, and today it is coming to a close. And like I said, next week we're going to be doing some different stuff, but today I just want us to focus in on Jesus' final words as he closes out the Sermon on the Mount, and he does it in quite the unexpected way, right? Like if you were, if you were preparing a sermon, you would not do it the way that Jesus did it, and yet that's like how he did it, right? And so maybe we should be doing sermons different. I don't know. But anyways, before we do that, and before we really launch into what that looks like and why he ended things the way that he did, I want to talk about tornadoes for a second. So just question, anybody grow up in the South? Anybody? I know a few people. Okay, got a few people. You guys especially, man. What is like March through June, man? Tornado season, right? Dude, tornado season. So, like, I promise we'll make this make sense. I got 2 tornado stories that I wanted to share with you guys this morning that are, they're going to play into where we're headed this morning. So the first one is probably the scariest tornado experience I ever had. I was driving home from college, and I went to college about an hour and a half away from where my house was, and so I went to college in this little town called Jonesboro, Arkansas, and in the middle of the Mississippi Delta, flatlands as far as the eye can see. I mean, there's really nothing until you get to beyond the mountains, beyond the Rockies and stuff. There's nothing really quite like it to where you can see for miles and miles. I mean, if there aren't trees, it just disappears over the horizon. That you can see so far, right? And there's this one stretch of road that was about 20 miles long, and you could see, from the second you pull on this road, you could see a little bump at the end of the road, and for 20 miles, dude, you could just take your hands off the road and you would just head straight towards this thing, right? And I remember heading out. My mom actually called me before I came home and was like, hey, be careful, there are some bad storms out. And I was like, well, that's weird, because it's not something she would ever do, right? And so anyways, I'm heading home, and sure enough, like, it was nasty enough outside that I turned on my radio, and they're like calling for some storms like right that I'm gonna like drive through on my way home. Now that little bump at the end of that 20-mile road was an overpass, and not just like a vehicle overpass, but they would have these double-decker coal cars that would go under it, and so it was an extremely tall like overpass right in the middle of flatland, so as far as you can see. And I'll never forget, man, I'm approaching this in my little Toyota Corolla grocery getter, and the winds are kicking up, and there is like the nastiest, blackest, like cloud just hanging there, bubbling, and dude, this thing looked ominous, like it could drop a tornado out of it. And honestly, like looking at it from the ground, it looked like by the time you got on top of this overpass that you could just reach out of your car and like rub the bottom of the cloud. It was that thick and just right there, right? And so, dude, my heart is racing as I approach this thing. And they were talking about that there was a row of storm chasers out there, like setting at this intersection. And I know that the second I top this hill, if they're still there, I'm going to be able to see these storm chasers on the other side of this. And dude, let me just tell you, like, all the alarms are going off that this is not a good place to be, right? In the middle of the flatlands, on top of the only, like, tall structure, and the nastiest cloud for miles around is, like, right there, right? And so, dude, I kid you not, I am freaking out as I'm driving over saying, there's nobody else on the road. I'm doing, like, 100 miles an hour over this overpass, just hoping I can, like, jump it, right? And so I'm on top of this overpass, and I'm like looking around, freaking out, and all of a sudden, I feel this rush of wind come into the car, man. I hear what sounds like a freight train, and dude, you ever feel that feeling like sheer terror just like grips you, and it feels like you get shocked. You know what I'm talking about? You know that feeling that just like, dude, it just feels like a pulse of electricity has hit you, and I am like about to die on top of this thing, right? And I realized what I had done is in my frantic like looking around, I had hit the window button with my elbow, and so I was like, dude, it totally was not a tornado, but I could have sworn that it was. I was about to die. I didn't even stop at the 3-way, like the storm storm chasers were there. I'm sure they thought I was insane because I came around that corner on 2 wheels. I didn't realize for like a solid minute that that's what had happened. I thought I was like being sucked up in this tornado, you know. Crazy thing is that actually like 5 minutes later, a tornado dropped out of that cloud and actually trailed along behind me for quite a while. I actually did a lot of damage in the next little town up the road. I mean, had I been like 5 minutes later, it could have been a totally different story. All right, so that's story 1. Story 2, radically different. Tornado season, it brings a lot of things, like hurricane season in Florida. I've come to find that people do this crazy thing, hurricane parties. Or tornado parties. You guys ever have tornado parties, right? So there's usually one person that has like a good basement, and that was us, man. We had a 3-story house, and the bottom floor of it was underground, and it was like, dude, we had a full bedrooms, kitchen, living room, dining room, like the whole 9 yards. And so, you know, they would come out and they would say, storms are going to be bad tonight. And so, dude, we would throw like a tornado party at our house. And people would come and bring food. And I just remember like it was always a blast because it was like a school night and I had all my friends over and we're hanging out, like watching TV and movies and eating potluck at the house. Totally different environment, right? Totally different environment. Like, in that moment, did tornadoes stop becoming any less dangerous between those 2 stories? No, man, tornadoes are dangerous, right? Like, and they kill a lot of people. And what was the difference? What was the difference in my response? Well, it was what I was grounded in, right? Like, one of those situations, I am literally in the most vulnerable spot for miles around in a car that would have been like a Hot Wheels car to a tornado, right? Like Toyota Corolla, man. It would have twisted that thing in half. And the other is like in basement, in shelter, concrete walls all around us. Like, even if a tornado come and sucked the roof of this house off, yeah, it may have been bad. Like, we may have not, came out of that unscathed, but chances are we were going to escape with our lives. Get that? Like, even at a direct hit from a tornado, we would have been okay. And this is where Jesus is taking us this morning, right? So let me give you another example, though, because I had like 2 people that got the tornado thing, right? Like, so if you didn't grow up in the South, let me give you another. We actually started our Financial Peace University for our college age and young adult class down here last night. So Financial Peace University, if you've ever been through that, or really any sort of like financial, like planning, strategizing class, what's step number 1 in that? Emergency plan, right? Emergency plan. Why is that, right? $1,000 in emergency. If you're a Dave Ramsey guy, like $1,000 in emergency plan. Why is that? There's no such thing as emergencies or at least no such thing as financial emergencies if you're financially prepared for them, right? There's only emergencies or financial emergencies if you're not like ready to incur that, right? Your water heater going out is only a problem if you don't have an extra $1,500 laying around in your bank account, right? If you're prepared for that and you're ready to do that, it's like, yeah, this stinks, but like we were ready. We were ready for this. And this is how Jesus ends his most famous sermon. So I want you to keep these 2 images in your mind, right? We're going to draw off of them again and again throughout the sermon today. So keep these images in your mind, and we're going to read how Jesus closes out his sermon. You guys ready? You good? Matthew chapter 7, if you're following along in your own Bible. If not, we will have it up here on the screen. So Matthew chapter 7, we'll work through verses 24 through 29. Jesus' final words, Sermon on the Mount, right? Here's what he says. Therefore, and let's stop, right? I know we're moving at breakneck speed here this morning, right? So let's stop. So anytime you see the word therefore in the Bible, you need to stop and ask the question, what is it there for, right? I know, I wish I could say that was mine, but I'm not that clever, right? So what is it there for? And sometimes that can be the words before that, it can be the paragraph before that, but in this case, as we're going to see, Jesus is drawing off of everything that he said so far in the Sermon on the Mount. And if you're like, man, I haven't been here for all of this, if you're not, we're going to cover that, right? But everything that he has said, if it is true, then here's what he says, right? So therefore, if all of what I've said is true, everyone who hears these words of mine, all of what I've said, Sermon on the Mount, right? Tracking? And acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. You guys remember this story? The wise man built his... You want to sing it with me? No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock, right? But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. And Jesus ends his sermon right there. Everybody's like, what in the world, right? Like, how does that tie in with everything that he said before, and why would you end, like, what has been this incredibly impactful sermon with that story, right? In Matthew, the gospel writer Matthew, he adds a little editorial note, right, as he looks around at the crowds, and he says, when Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes, right? So people are, like, kind of blown away, essentially, and that's how the story of the Sermon on the Mount ends, right? Are we good, right? We just see you guys next week. Now, I think we need to do a little work around this, right? Because here's the deal. Jesus is telling us a parable. And a parable is this word picture. It relies on devices like simile and metaphor and allegory to convey a deep spiritual meaning, right? It's like poetry. Man, you can say more in 3 lines of poetry than you can say in 300 lines of a book, right? Somehow these word pictures, these similes and metaphors, these allegorical sayings, these pictures that Jesus gives us, it dives beneath the surface of the intellect and it lodges itself in our soul. It changes our emotions and it affects us in a way that like mere knowledge or intellectual information can't do. And parables have this amazing way, this really unique way of doing that, of diving below the surface, diving below just mere intellect, and affecting these deeper regions of our hearts and souls to drive us to action. Because you saw that, right? Like whoever does my words or whoever doesn't do it. So Jesus is trying to drive a change in people, and he chooses a parable to do this. But we got to talk about parables for a second because they're confusing, right? You ever tried to read through the Bible and you read these parables and it's like, dude, what in the world is going on there? And then you see these parts of the Bible where his followers, like the closest apostles, were like, yeah, dude, what was going on there, right? And they get Jesus by himself and they're like, can you explain this parable? And Jesus always does the same thing when he chooses to describe a parable. When he unpacks what a parable means, he begins to take the pieces of the metaphor and to define those for us, right? Well, this is what seed means, and this is what the ground means, and this is what the sower means, right? You guys kind of tracking along with that. And so I want to do that this morning because Jesus doesn't unpack this parable for us, right? This is one of several parables that Jesus doesn't actually unpack, but we're going to do that. And I think we need to do that as we talk about a house, right? This is about a house. 2 builders, 2 foundations, right? But they're both building a house. And so let's begin there, and we're going to work through the pieces of this parable and see what exactly it was that Jesus was communicating. You guys good? Thumbs up. Everybody cool? All right, here we go. So a house, let's start with the definition. A house is what we give value and virtue to in our lives. It is what we would say is significant, right? That has weight and bearing on our life, that affects how we live, right? And because we cannot separate a house from its foundation, right? There's no such thing as a house without a foundation. Even if you don't pour a concrete foundation, you have to put a house on something, right? We don't have floating houses yet, right? Every house is grounded in something, right? And it is from this foundation upon which, like, we build our lives and which comes to define what is valuable, what is virtuous, and what is significant for us, right? And so here's the deal. I want to kind of explain a few things, and then we'll come back to this house thing. Because the Bible uses the word house to describe several different things. And we'll better define this, I think, as we see how the Bible defines this term house. So 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19, it says this. It says, or do you not know that your body is a temple or a house, a dwelling place, right, of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own? And so first and foremost, just simply enough, a house refers to us as individuals, right? As our lives. It's about the things that we give value and virtue and significance to in our lives. So let me give you maybe a quick example. Let's use our words, all right? Let's use our words for an example of this, right? What do you give value and virtue and significance to in the way that you use your words, right? Do you value integrity? Do you value truth and integrity so much that your life is defined by those virtues, right? That you live in such a way that, as Jesus would say, like your yes can be yes and your no can be no. That your word is just trusted to be good and truthful. Right? And your whole life backs this up. Or do you value, like, getting your own way? Do you value manipulating the perceptions of other people to benefit you? And how do we do that? Well, we do that with spin. We do that with stretching the truth or conveniently leaving out details or maybe just telling outright lies, right? And so because we value and we've given virtue and significance to ourselves over, like, what it may cost us, right, to be truthful and integrous at times, Like, we're willing to do things and to act in ways, right, that to live out to be the means to that end, right? That we actually value ourselves. We value our own perception in the eyes of other people so much so that we are willing to do whatever it takes to prop that perception up to create this illusion or this reality around who we are, circumstance. You guys get that? Everybody make sense? But it isn't just words. It's every aspect of our lives. That we are this complex matrix of values, things that we consider virtuous, things that we consider as significant. And man, we give weight to these things in our lives, and then we live in light of those things. Right? Like, I think we just need to go on. We'll talk more about it as we go, all right? So Joshua 24:15 says this. This is a super famous verse. It's on coffee mugs, and probably some of y'all have bought this, right, at, what's the store? Hobby Lobby. Yeah, you may have this on your... So it's Hobby Lobby stuff here. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So a house can also refer to a family. This is Joshua speaking to the Israelites. And he isn't saying that his literal house is going to serve the Lord. He's saying that him, his wife, his children, right, anyone that is there in his house, are going to run their lives based on the foundation of the teachings of God. Did you see that, right? We will serve who? That this house is founded on the teachings and service to the Lord. Right, so this is a house. And so the idea is that, yes, you are an individual. Yes, your life is this complex matrix of values, virtues, significance, all those things, right? And that makes you who you are. It makes you make the choices that you make. But you don't live in a vacuum, do you? That you're part of a family. And that you and your wife and your children, whoever it is that you may be in closest relationship to, that there's a dynamic that exists as all of those things come together under one roof, right? And we know this to be true. And man, if even one thing gets off balanced, or if something changes in that dynamic, right, it changes the whole. Like what we do affects people around us without question, and that's a fairly easy concept, right? I like what the psalmist David says in Psalm 122, verse 1. He says, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. All right, so a house also refers to a church. But I think let's expand that out. It isn't necessarily just a church, but we as families, right, we as individuals are part of families, and we as families are part of these bigger communities. Maybe it's our city, maybe it's our church, maybe it's something. So we put our kids back here. Because I hear somebody rumbling around. If we have some kid bust through like the Kool-Aid man, somebody be sure and get it on video, right? If somebody like rips through our screens, please, I want to see some cameras up, because it'll go viral. All right, but we definitely have to get a lock back there. But anyway, so I heard somebody banging, and there's a good chance that may happen this morning because we switched everything up. But anyways, all right, so back on track. So our churches, our communities are a reflection of our families, these smaller groups built of these systems of values and virtues, significance, things that we give weight to and then live in light of, right? So the question is, right? Are we a collection of people committed to following Jesus, right? The way of Jesus here at the Outpost, or are we concerned with something else? Does something else come to define all of those things for us, right? And that's a rabbit hole that I cannot chase because it leads to a soapbox that I don't have time for this morning. All right. Number 4, we also see here a house in reference to the house of Israel. And this is all over the Old Testament. So a house can also refer to a nation, right? Again, let's just extrapolate the picture out. Our nation isn't just a bunch of individuals. It is individuals living in families, living in communities that come together and whose values affect like the direction and the trajectory of even nations and kingdoms, right? Like this is that we are who we are, and we may not like who we are, and there may be big parts of who we are, but like here's the deal. You're a part of who we are. And like who we are is contributed to and has led us to the place that we're at, like it or not, right? Because we are not just individuals. The story of the Bible is that, man, what we do affects everything around us. And then finally, and this is sort of the pinnacle of this whole teaching on a house, and then we're going to move on to bigger and better things, right? Psalm 23, if you've been to a funeral, you've probably heard this before, right? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, right? And here's how that psalm ends. It says, surely goodness and loving kindness, right? You may have heard it, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is in reference to God's kingdom. This is like the cosmic grand community, right? And then we know that there is a kingdom of this earth. Man, my thing is like bugging me to death this morning. Sorry about that. We know that there's this like kingdom of the earth, but there's also this kingdom like God's kingdom that is defined by a certain set of values, virtues, and significance, things that He has defined as valuable, virtuous, and significant for our lives. And if we choose to live within that and operate within that, right, then we are a part of that kingdom. We are bringing that kingdom here and here now, right? So here's the deal. Here's the big takeaway. You guys ready for this? It's super theological and philosophical, right? We are all building a house. Every one of us. Again, I know that may not be super philosophical, right? But every one of you, myself included, we're building a house. That this isn't something that you can escape. That it's our words. It's our relationships. It's the things that we find valuable. Things that we give significance and weight to in our relationships that affect the way that we use our words in our relationships. The way that we act in kindness to those who don't like us, or maybe those that we do like. It's what we do in our parenting to our children. It affects the way that we act in our job. Man, this is everything that Jesus has been teaching us since the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, right? This is everything that He has been talking about. Every week, Jesus has been offering us this choice. Let's just start with the Beatitudes, right? We started with these attitudes, and Jesus defines what is valuable and virtuous and significant for us to have and for us to hold and follow as our attitudes. I'll just give you one of them, peacemaker, right? That Jesus calls us to be peacemakers, and we have this choice. You're one of two things. You are a peacemaker or you are a peacekeeper. You guys remember that part of the sermon, right? If you've been with us since the beginning, right, we talked about this, and those are different things. Both of those are pursuing peace. One is a real peace and a peace that lasts, and the other one is this sort of fake peace, right? That the peacekeeper will do anything to avoid conflict or to minimize conflicts like bearing on their life. And so, man, I walk away. I do anything I can to just sort of shut it down so I don't have to deal with it. That's being a peacekeeper. But Jesus calls us and He gives us the choice. He's like, man, I have determined that peacemakers are valuable in my kingdom. People that will willingly, right, enter into conflict to bring about resolution, to bring about real and lasting peace. And man, we talked about how that is messy, dangerous work, right? And do we need that in our world? Dude, absolutely. In 1,000 different places, we need that in our world, right? And Jesus called us to this, but you have a choice. And you make a choice like any time you come into contact with conflict, right? Maybe you've been there this week, or maybe you're headed into it this next week, right? And you know there's a conflict coming. You have a choice. You can avoid, and we are good at that. We are so good at that. Or you can make a choice to allow Jesus to define what is virtuous and good and significant in your life. And you can engage as a peacemaker. And man, that may mean some hard and some difficult things, but that's the choice that we get to make, right? That this is the foundation, is that we would allow Jesus and His kingdom economy to determine the virtues, values, and significance, and therefore build our house on this foundation, right? So, that's the rock. We've defined the house, we've defined the rock. Let's talk about sand for a second, because sand really it really gave me fits as I was working through this. And I realized that I had some deep-seated issues with this. So anybody grow up singing the wise man built? Anybody grow up singing that, right? A few people, right? I grew up, and did anybody grow up doing flannel graphs as a kid? I just got to know. Anybody do flannel graphs? Okay. I think that is purely a church thing. I don't know if it's outside of that, but if you've never experienced the beauty of a flannel graph, right? It's this blue or green felt board and these felt cutout characters, right? Honestly, it was churches that were too cheap to purchase a media pack or something. But you stick the little characters on and they kind of move around. Everybody kind of like a popsicle stick theater, dude. And I had this Miss Una, this 85-year-old woman that was my Sunday school teacher, and dude, she could make that thing come alive. It was like watching a cartoon, right? And I've seen that story played out, and it's always they put the little beach and the waves, and the house is on there, and then there's a rock, and they set the house on the rock. You tracking along, flannel graph. Or if you've seen it in I don't know, sing-along music videos for Vacation Bible School, and it's always the fact that the house has been built on the beach. Anybody resonate with that? Yeah. Okay, so if you've seen that, and I gotta be honest with you, that really gives me a hard time because that guy's an idiot, right? Why would you build your house on the beach, right? Why would you just set your of course that's stupid, right? Nobody does that. And I think that has been like a major disconnect for me with this story for a really long time. So let me help sort of clear that up for us, because Jesus, like, we need to do a little bit of work in where Jesus was and where his audience was, because they got this. They actually like immediately understood this. And so Jesus, as he's standing there having this conversation about soil and sand and rocks and all that stuff, right? There is it's underneath him, right? And Jesus can like bend down and he can knock on it. And the soil there in Jerusalem was what we call alluvial soil. You ever heard of that before? Alluvial or alluvium, alluvial soil. And it is this composition of clay, and we know clay, silt, which is this like really dark, rich, organic matter, really fine. It's deposited through rivers and that kind of stuff, and sand. So clay, silt, and sand. And the thing about this like dirt composition there, especially in the region where Jesus was giving this, was that when that stuff dried out, because it was like predominantly clay, dude, it got hard as a rock, man. Like it was flat. In fact, it would get so solid and seemingly impermeable that you could sweep it, and like if your feet weren't sweaty, you could walk across it. Like people had this as their floors, but like you could walk across this and your feet wouldn't even get dirty, right? That's how solid it would pack down. The problem was, because it had sand in the mixture, like it wasn't non-permeable. Water could come into it. It would then mix with the silt in the sort of the deposit there, and it would turn to like jelly, and it would just slide all over the place. And so flash floods, landslides, they were a major deal in Jesus' day, right? So this like actually makes a little bit more sense, right? Because again, nobody intentionally builds their house on a known unstable foundation, right? Nobody looks at the beach and says that's a good place, right? Let's bring this back to where we're going. Nobody thinks that their values, the things that they've like defined as virtuous and significant in their life, is bad. Right? They're both building a house. Like everyone's building a house. You're going to have these things. And nobody does that saying like, yeah, I'm going to be a liar. Right? That's good. Right? I'm going to be a murderer. That's cool. Right? Nobody lives that way, dude. Like nobody wakes up one day and decides that they're going to murder or like cheat on their spouse or any of those things. Like nobody. But the reality is that those things exist in the world that we live in. It's that they're affected by the choices that we have made. And it happens in small, incredibly subtle ways. Subtle things that we define as virtuous and good, right? And remember, I made a statement a few weeks ago. I said that there's no such thing as living against your better judgment. Anybody heard that? Right? Well, I was against my better judgment, and so I didn't do that. Right? Everybody's heard that, or probably even used that at some point. That's like, dude, that's baloney. There's no such thing as living against your better judgment. Right? I gave you guys an example of a yellow light, right? And all of a sudden, the light turns yellow. You're a few feet back, right? Depending on how fast you're traveling, you go into this snap millisecond like cycle of making judgment calls, right? How late am I? Is this a traffic light? Are there cops that like to hang out here? Am I going to get T-boned if I blow through this light? Like, we make all these snap judgments, and we make 100 of them in a snap second. And based off that judgment, dude, our foot either presses on the gas or it hits the brake. Everybody tracking with that, right? Now, here's the deal. You may really need to get through that light. Like, you may have been late like 2 or 3 times this month, right, for work, and like, dude, you cannot afford to be late again. Right? But the reality is that even as true as that may be, is like as relevant and right in front of you as that may be, if you hit the brake, it's because you made a judgment call that it was actually better for you to stop, right? Like, dude, getting T-boned for a job I don't even like ain't worth it. I'm stopping, right? And so like foot goes on the brake. There's no such thing as living against our better judgment, right? At the end of the day, we always act in accordance with our virtues, our values, and those things that we consider significant, even if they're inconsistent with how we would define those, right? We'll take shortcuts. We'll do things that we know maybe aren't consistent with norm, but because actually maybe our virtue or the thing that we weigh as significant in this area may be a little bit deeper, right, than how we would typically define it, like we're going to act in accordance with those things always. So the question is like, man, we are all building a house. We all do this. We're all gonna define these things for ourselves naturally, right? And so, what is it that causes a person to dig a little bit deeper and to build their house on a rock instead of the sand? Right? Because Jesus, like, apparently something about us defining those things for ourselves isn't good, and at the end of the story, it actually doesn't lead to anything good for us. And so what is it that makes a person decide to build their life on the rock? And I think we see that in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." You may have heard this before, right? "And the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." So here's the deal. Fear of the Lord, that's not like being afraid of God. That's not like what's going on there. Maybe to an extent, but that's not the primary message of what fear of the Lord means. It's reverence. It's awe. It is an understanding that He holds ultimate knowledge. As the creator and architect of the universe, He has defined how His creation works best. So if we're going to live within this, if we're going to carry out this sort of like divine mandate to take this creation and to bring out its potential as these co-rulers, if we're going to do this, then man, we have to lean on His definition of what is virtuous and good and significant. So fear of the Lord is this understanding that, man, in all of these areas of my life, like I'm going to go back and I'm going to allow Him to define those things for me. Because at the end of the day, if I define them for myself in any way, it's sand. And it doesn't hold up over time, man. And again, this is the choice that Jesus has been giving us every single week in this Sermon on the Mount. It's His life example. In fact, it's the entire story of the Bible, man, is that God has revealed Himself to us. His character, His nature, what He has defined as good, virtuous, and significant. And He's revealed how we get to live within those definitions of what it looks like to live like in relationship with our fellow human being, what it looks like to live in relationship with Him. And like the call and the premise of the Bible is that His ways are good ways, like because He sort of created it all and He knows how it works best. He knows how relationships work best. He knows how finances and sexuality and marriage and parenting, He knows how all of these things work best. And the question is will you choose to follow after Him? And did you notice the stakes? Because the stakes are incredibly high. If there weren't stakes, then who cares? Like, who cares if you build your life on the sand? If you live in the middle of the Sahara Desert where it never rains, like ever, who cares if you build your house on the sand, right? But did you notice? Jesus just assumes that there are going to be storms that come. Here's the deal. If you've lived long enough, you know this to be true. You're in one of three places, man. You're heading into a storm, you're in the middle of one, or you're headed out of one, about to be headed into another one, right? And maybe you know you're headed into a storm and like you see it coming few days, few weeks, few months out, like you know this thing is just headed your way, or maybe it's just waiting around the corner to like clock you when you step around. It's like, dude, where did that even come from, right? Anybody been there before? Yeah, absolutely. Or you're in the middle of a storm. Man, and it's your job. It's finances. It's a marriage thing that's like falling apart at the seams. It's, dude, my kids are wilding out. Like whatever it is, right? It's all of these different areas. And like, dude, the storms are going to come. And here, just as a side note, this is totally free. I'm not charging you for this. But as a side note, man, if anyone tells you that because you're following Jesus, you're not going to experience storms, right? That life is just going to go well because you're following Jesus, or that somehow if you just like pray enough, or you just read your Bible enough, or if you just have enough faith, somehow like, dude, everything's going to be okay, it's all going to work out. Dude, bro, they are lying to you, man. That is not how it works. In fact, that person is a false teacher that you need to turn around and run 1,000 miles an hour away from in the opposite direction, man, because that is dangerous. Again, that was free, right? So these storms, they're relational, they're marital, they're financial, they're at your job, they're in your parenting, they're maybe even in your own mind as you battle anxiety or depression, or maybe some things that like nobody could even imagine was going on with you, right? Like those storms aren't always visible, they're always in front of you where other people can see them, but they're real nonetheless. And if you've been through storms, I don't have to define that any further, right? Like, am I good with that? Everybody gets sort of the concept of storms. But what I do think I need to talk about is this idea that it's not quite as simple and unilateral as any of their names might suggest, right? Like, let's just take our job, for example, right? Our job, like a storm at our job, that sounds really simple and neat and tidy. But the reality is that you are this complex matrix of virtues, values, and significance. And the way you see those things and the way you live in light of those affect how you work. It affects how you see your job. It affects how you see your coworkers. And guess what? You're a part of a community there at your job, aren't you? And some of those people, they hold values and virtues and things of significance that are similar to you. And many of them do not. And when those things come together and they clash, and all of a sudden, man, you have people that are backbiting or stabbing each other in the back or stepping on one another to get that promotion, whatever that is, man, like whatever your job or your workplace looks like, we know that it's not quite as simple that storms, man, they're unique. Every one of them is different. And maybe you're a college student or you're a high school student, and your storms are going to look different than my storms, right? I'm raising a couple kids. I'm like in the middle of this whole thing, it's different, and every new season, every new area of life brings about a new climate capable of producing storms that you've never seen before and that will wreck your house in ways that, man, like you've never experienced before. Anybody been there before? Like, where did this thing come from, right? I never thought I would have to deal with X, Y, or Z, but here we are. We're in the middle of this storm. And so all of a sudden, sort of the call and sort of the invitation of this is for us to base our life, base our values, our virtues, and the things that we define as significant on Jesus and his teaching. So let's go back to our job, right? That storm comes, and maybe it's interpersonal conflict, or maybe it's you handling finances there at your job or something, right? Any number of things. Does Jesus speak to any of those things? Does Jesus speak to our interpersonal conflict and how we handle those things? Yeah, absolutely. He speaks to actually every aspect of our lives, and all of a sudden, man, if our life is founded on these principles and we are living these principles out, does that storm have to mean the end of you? Let's just take interpersonal conflict, right? Man, does that interpersonal conflict have to blow into something that gets you and the other person fired, or that has you wanting to leave your job, right? But what if we begin to work in this value and this virtue of forgiveness, of loving and serving your enemy, that person that is actively seeking to destroy you, man, but we live in such a sacrificial way that, like, we're going to love them, and all of a sudden we go back to that week in our Sermon on the Mount, and it stops that disruptive and, like, devastating cycle of just, like, retaliation. And where's that led to? How many wars have been started? How many countless people have died because, man, we retaliate because they retaliated and we retaliate, right? But all of a sudden, Jesus offers us, through his words on loving our enemy, an off-ramp to that crazy cycle. So all of a sudden, man, this storm begins to break up. And it isn't that you maybe don't take some wind damage, right? It isn't that it might not be scary or that you might not come out bumped or bruised in this thing, but it doesn't have to be the end of your house. It doesn't have to be the end of your job. And here's the deal. Even if it is the end of your job, you operate in this paradigm that says that you have a good and loving Father who knows your needs better than you know your own needs. He is there for you, to care for you and to love you and to pick you up in that. But that's not the end of your story. That your house hasn't been taken down, even if it ends up in you losing your job in the middle of it. And let's just take it a step further, man. Like, in fact, the best news of all is that if you have a life built on the foundation of Jesus, that not even the storm of death is the end of your story. That's the claim of the Christian faith. Is that, man, we've seen a resurrection. Man, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that Jesus of Nazareth was a real human being that really walked on this earth. There are more people that write about him, outside of the Bible even, than that wrote about Caesar, the most powerful man in the world in his time. And we teach him in textbooks, right? Like, Jesus was real. He walked this earth. He said these things. He made these claims about himself. And he was really killed on a Roman cross. And we can tell you that without a shadow of a doubt. Right? But the whole entirety of the Christian faith is predicated on this fact of resurrection. That's it, man. We talked about this a few weeks ago in our Easter service. It's like, this is the decision that you have to make. Because if it is, and if that was real, then it means that all of these things that Jesus said were validated through that resurrection. And man, that God, the claim about that resurrection was that this was the way that God was validating everything that Jesus had said, that he really was the rock. He really was the architect and creator of the world, man. And his word can be trusted as good and true. You have to make that decision. Right? And so I just want to preach back through the entire Sermon on the Mount. And some of you are like, oh my gosh, this took 4 months. Right, all right, here's my promise. 3 minutes or less. Hopefully, 3 minutes or less. I want to preach back through this because some of you have missed it. Maybe you missed a few weeks here or there or whatever. You weren't able to catch something that we had done. And I want to run us back through these choices that Jesus gave us every single week. All right? See, man, that Jesus is offering us a rock, or we can choose our own way in this. And he starts it out with our attitude, right? It's that through the Beatitude, Jesus tells us that our attitude is everything, right? That our attitude towards God affects our attitude towards our fellow man. And that in turn affects every aspect of our life. We talked about the attitude of being a peacemaker over a peacekeeper is just one of those examples of the type of attitude he talked about, right? And so we get to make this choice. Are we going to be in control of our attitude, right? Or are we going to allow Jesus to define those attributes, those things that are valuable and significant and virtuous in our attitude? He teaches that we are salt and light. That is to be agents of change and contrast in the world around us, man. That our world is hurting in so many ways, tangible and intangible, man. And that God actually created you to uniquely make an impact in that world. To change that world for the better, right? To bring that message of blessing and goodness, and not just the message of it, but actual tangible results of goodness and help, service, sacrificially living and giving for the sake of others, man, to make a real difference in the world around us. Or, right? Well, let me go back. And here's the deal. That has to happen within community, right? The way that we do that most effectively is together. Or we can choose to go it alone, right? We can choose to live only for ourselves without regard for the goodness and blessing that you can bring around you, right, in the rest of the world. That's your choice, and you get to make it, man. He tells us that if we don't control our anger will control us. If we don't control our lust, it will burn down every relationship that we have. He did not say that he hates divorced people, but simply that he hates what divorce does to people. And so we get to choose how we interact in our human relationships with other people. Jesus was doing so much more than just touching anger, divorce, and lust in those things. That Jesus was rooting out this idea, man, that how we act is traced back to these things far upstream in our heart. And we get to choose how we interact with people around us. Or we can allow him to define that. He would tell us to let our yes be yes and our no be no, right? We've kind of talked about this. That we would be people whose words can be trusted and people who do not use their words to manipulate the hearts and minds of others, taking them captive to our desires. Or we can choose to use our words in a way that ultimately benefits us, even if that means lying, even if that means tearing other people down to get that, right? We're to be giving people, right? Jesus would communicate this idea that giving is not something that we simply do with our finances. It's actually who we are as people. We are to be generous people, sharing all that we have for the well-being of others. Or we can adopt this scarcity mindset, right? We have to hang on to all that we have, that it's up to us to make ends meet, right? And that's our choice. And Jesus would tell us that one of those choices and one of those roads leads to us being rich in the long term, and the other leads to us being rich only in the here and now. He would show us through his teaching on prayer that I am your loving Father. I am your King. I am your provider. I am your forgiver. And I am your leader. And he would tell us to seek first the kingdom of God and that everything else is going to work out. Or we can choose to be all of those things for ourselves and just sort of hope that it all works out. He invites us to not be anxious because we have a loving Father who already knows tomorrow. Because he is in ultimate control, he can confidently invite us to cast our anxiety on him. Or we can choose to hold on to fears and anxieties because perhaps maybe we can just fix it, right? Like if I just suffer in silence long enough, if I just, right, like I can work this out within my own mind, like maybe if I just hang on to this long enough, I can fix this. We looked at this reality that Jesus, he wants this well-rounded approach for our mental health. Man, we are not just spiritual beings. We are physical beings. And so our anxiety, our depression and stuff, maybe have real physical causes, diet, exercise, chemical imbalances. It may be things because we're mental beings that have happened, trauma in our past. And Jesus' desire for us is that, man, we would seek help in that area as well. And man, like I want to destigmatize like taking a pill because man, you may absolutely need to do that. Or we can choose to hang on to those things and seek a solution within sort of that cage of our own mind. Your choice. Jesus would tell us that he is the door to life. And that as we submit to him and his way, we are able to experience the fullest human experience possible. That decision to follow him doesn't just have an impact on the here and now. This is a couple of weeks ago we talked about this, right? But that decision actually affects our eternity, right? Because we all will face the storm of death someday. And it can be the thing that ends your story and takes it to a really bad place, or it can, man, through Jesus, through what he has already shown us is possible, man, we can endure even through that. That doesn't have to be the end of our story. And we saw that hell isn't a threat from a vengeful God. Actually, it is him honoring your decision to build your house wherever you would like, and then live out the consequences of that building place. Right? That God doesn't. I hate that when people say, "Well, God throws people in." Why would a good God throw people into hell? And my response is that actually he doesn't, man. God honors a decision that people have made to define value and virtue and significance for themselves. And he allows them a place to work that out for forever and to be the one that is in control of that. And man, this picture of hell is this reality that we actually don't like where that leads us at the end of the day. And we've seen it as we've looked around our world, the storm damage that is caused in the here and now. And imagine that damage and that brokenness extrapolated over an eternity. Now, what does 100 trillion years into the future look like, living under the consequences of our own brokenness? Yeah, incredibly terrible. So every single week, man, we've been faced with this decision. Will we choose to believe Jesus' words about these issues and then live in light of them, or are we going to choose to define these areas for ourselves? So I want to close with two questions, and then we're going to have a quick conversation, and then we're out, right? Two questions. What is your foundation? Let me restate it. Let me restate it another way. Who defines what is valuable, virtuous, and significant in your life? Here's the deal. If you would consider yourself a follower of Jesus, please do not check out on me right now. Don't go like chasing butterflies in a field somewhere, right? Like stick with me during this. Who defines what is valuable, virtuous, and significant in your life? And here's the deal. You don't miss this. We got to go back to the parable once more and see one aspect that we left out. The whole imperative here is that you would do what Jesus says. Did you notice? This is the difference. This is the difference between the two builders. Is that both builders were in the audience that day. And you're here. People that will build their life on the sand and people that will build their life on the rock, we're all sitting in the same room right now. If you've been following along in the Sermon on the Mount, then you've heard everything that Jesus said as well. And the difference between these two people is that one of them said, man, that's good stuff, right? Man, I totally agree with that. Love your enemy. Dude, how much better would we be for that? Forgive those people who hurt you. Don't lie, right? Don't allow your anger to consume you. Be a peacemaker, man. Those are good. Dude, those aren't disagreeable to anyone. Who would disagree with any of that, right? Nobody. Nobody would disagree with any of that. But yet, one person actually walked out of there and did what Jesus said. And the other person said, no, those are good things, man. And yet, they still went on to live in such a way because, again, you can't live against your better judgment, right? You've lived out a system of values, virtues, and significance. And whether you would consider yourself a follower of Jesus or not, every single person lives in light of those things. You're building a house. So who defines that? I don't mean just who defines that for you intellectually, because, man, we have gotten that wrong as the church, right? We're good at conveying information. Dude, I love to get going on a good class or some deep theology or something like that, right? I can teach, bro. That's good stuff. But what are you doing with it? And this is the imperative, and this is where Jesus ends his whole sermon, is like, all right, you've heard it. So what are you going to do with it? Right? You're going to walk away and just say that's good stuff? Or are you actually going to begin to live in light of this? And the way that we do that is through the gospel. It's realizing that, man, we don't even have the power to do that. And that if we are going to do that, then we got to allow him to be the one that even works that ability in us. It begins with this turning away from being the one who does define all those and saying, man, I have wrought some incredible brokenness on the world through my own definitions of value, virtue, and significance. I've done damage. I've been the storm for some people in their lives. I've been part of this greater storm that has caused some incredible damage in the world around us. And God, I am sorry. I turn away from that, and I want you to define those things for me as I follow after you with everything that I have. Man, it's that simple. It is that simple. There's no magic formula. There's no magic prayer. It is that. And if that is you and that's where you're at this morning, you walked in here and you would say, man, I'm wasn't sure about this whole Jesus thing, but man, if you want to follow after him, if you want to change the foundation of your life forever, it's that simple. No fancy words, no fancy nothing. God, I want that. And then pursue to live that out for the rest of your life, and you're going to get it wrong, right? Here's the deal. Before we go to people who consider themselves followers of Jesus, I just want to talk to you for a second. If you came in here this morning, you've been checking out this Jesus thing and maybe church or faith, I don't know, right? You've got doubts. You've got things that questions, you have skepticism, you have critiques, you have things, and dude, so do I, right? Bro, I'm the one up here talking to you right now, and I have my own. I have my own issues here with these things, and here it is, you don't have to suspend all of those things to follow after Jesus. If anybody's ever told you that, you don't have to. You don't have to suspend all doubt or all skepticism, that there are questions that I have that, man, I hope get answered someday, right? But here's the deal. It's I don't doubt that my car is going to get me where it needs to go. It has the ability to for me to put my key in. I've seen enough action movies, right? I can put my key in the ignition, it can just blow up. I don't know if that's really a thing or not, but I would say it probably could be, right? There's gasoline and sparks and stuff there. Maybe that's a real deal. But bro, I can trust that's not something I think about when I put my key. Maybe today I will, but typically, when I put my key in my ignition, I don't worry if I'm going to end up like a Jason Bourne movie, right? It's just going to blow up with me in it. No, I just trust that it's going to take me to the... Do I know everything about how that car operates? No. Do I have to be able to get in and to go along for the journey? There's the same way with Jesus. And I can tell you that he was real. I can tell you that he was here. I can tell you that he died. And for me, I've experienced the power of what it means to believe in his resurrection. I haven't had all my questions answered. I haven't had every skepticism met. But I can hold it in tension. I can trust him enough to hold some things in tension to follow after him. And man, you can do that. It doesn't make you a lesser person or it doesn't make you incomplete in your belief, because man, if you're just honest, everyone has questions and doubts and skepticisms. Dude, the car will get you there. It will. And he's good and he's trustworthy. And I've experienced enough to know that, man, I've made the right decision where I build my house on. But maybe you walked in here and you would consider yourself a follower of Jesus. And so this is why this series has been called Waypoints. Because on a map, Jesus gives us these things. He reminds us of his teachings concisely in the Bible. And he says, man, we get off track, don't we? We try to start edging back over onto the sand as we define how we use our words, how we deal in our relationships. And Jesus, no, come back in, right? Course correct a little bit. And so maybe for you, you would espouse these ideas because you're Christian, right? Whatever that means. You're a Christian, and so you would espouse these ideas as good and true because honestly, who wouldn't, right? Loving your enemy and all that, right? But man, just being real about it, there are plenty of these things that you don't live out in your day-to-day life. So the invitation for all of us, myself included, is to go back and see the ways in which I've gotten off track and approach this Sermon on the Mount as this set of waypoints that leads us back on the course of following Jesus. For that to be real, for that to be true, has to be real, actionable steps. So, that's how we're ending the Sermon on the Mount. I don't know where you're at. Maybe you got some more exploration that you would like to do before you make a decision that big. And man, I'm free. I'm free for coffee. I'm free to get together, right? In fact, we're going to have our next steps class right after this. And again, man, I would encourage you to stick around. Free lunch, right? Like, we got that covered. Childcare is good. Just come and hang out. Learn some stuff. Like, let us share. Ask the questions. This is going to be the space that we do that in. But maybe you want to deal with this right now. As a follower of Jesus, man, you know. Nobody has to tell you because you know. You know the areas that you begin to build your life on the sand again. This is the moment, right here at the end of this. We've been working towards this for 4 months. And that maybe you get to go back to the gospel and commit again to allow Him to define those areas in your life. Begin this week. The second you stand up and say amen here in a second or whatever, like you get to walk in a new direction, consistent with who you claim to follow. But maybe you need to follow Jesus for the very first time. And it is simple as, God, I'm sorry. I want to follow you, and I turn to you in this moment. I give you my life, right? Whatever that means, I don't have all the answers. I don't know. I follow you. I want you to define these things for me, and it is that simple. If that's you and you make that decision, man, please let somebody know. Like, fill out a connection card, do something, like grab it, drop it in the offering plate back there. But let somebody know, because we want to walk on that journey and help you take whatever those next steps are for you. Man, that's been it. It's the Sermon on the Mount. Good stuff, right? Dude, good stuff. I was so excited for us to launch into this. And where we're headed next is sort of the next logical step after the Sermon on the Mount for us. Man, and I hope that you will all join us again next week. It is going to be phenomenal. I look forward to every Sunday, but dude, I'm really looking forward to next week. So I hope you will be back with us and stick with us through the rest of the sermon series. So I don't know what you need to do. I'm going to pray and encourage you to take that step, whatever it may be, right now as we close out. Father God, we just thank you. Thank you for your words. Thank you for the example in the life of Jesus that we get to pattern ours after. Thank you that your words are life, vitality, and goodness. Father, that you have called us to make an impact in the world. Father, just thank you for everything in the Sermon on the Mount, Father, and I just pray that something, just one thing, would lodge in our hearts out of this series, God, that would help us take whatever that next step faithfulness is. Pray that we would do that, and we would walk in victory in that this week, and we would see the fruits of that this week as we choose to do that. Father, we trust you, we love you, we praise and honor your name. In Jesus' name, amen. Awesome. Guys, all right, as a reminder, before we stand up, this section right here, if you could really help me, let's put all those chairs